So as you're looking in memory in this one, if we were to have some sort of issues where we got the debugger going and we were seeing something that was in a hexadecimal value, we'd be able to use the calculator to convert it to decimal so that it was more understandable to us. Now, how big of numbers can we store? This website is kind of interesting. It shows us some good data. First of all, of course, the powers of 2 are so important in computing because binary is used to represent electronic signals on or off, so it equates well to binary. So if you remember, 2 to the power of 10 gives us 1024, our kilobyte. 2 to the power of 20 gives us what? Megabyte. 2 to the power of 30 gives us a gigabyte. And we continue on with our, petabyte, exabyte, whatever, all the different levels of bytes. Now, that's great. Each of those powers of 2 shows us the biggest number that can be held by that many bits. So how does that matter to us? Well, let's think about it. If I have an 8-bit operating system, like the old Nintendo, then the biggest number I can hold in memory is 1 less than 2 to the power of 8, or 255 characters. That's the biggest number I can read. That's the biggest number I can have. That's the most memory I can have, because I can't address memory that's higher than a number I don't know how to get to. Now, if I want a 16-bit operating system, like the old Windows, I could go up to 65,535. If I go to a 32-bit operating system, and like some of us are still running 32-bit versions of Office, if I go to a 32-bit operating system, I can do, what am I looking at here? 4 gig would be the biggest file. So that's the maximum amount of memory I could have on a machine that was running a 32-bit operating system. Now, if I go to a 64-bit, does it go that high? No. As you can see, it becomes astronomically larger, the amount of memory that's addressable. So that's why we want everything to be running 64-bit. Now, the 2 to n minus 1 gives us the biggest number, again, that can be addressable with that many bits. So with 8 bits, the biggest number we can get to is 255. 1 less than 2 to the power of 8. So let's just compare that to a hexadecimal. Powers of 16, if we had 8 buckets holding a hexadecimal number, we could hold this much. Where am I? 42 billion, whatever. So it's much more efficient to store things in hex. So when the book starts talking about that stuff, that's where we are. That's what we're thinking about, is how we're addressing each of these items on our sprite sheet. So the sprite sheet itself is not super complicated, and neither is hexadecimal, and none of it is going to be too much to handle if you just remember, oh yeah, I can just bring up the calculator and do that conversion. It's a much, much more efficient way of saving things. So let's start our project. We want to make sure that we're putting this in a folder that's inside of our GitHub folder, right? So in our same Unity location where we've been saving things, let's create a new project. I'm going to make sure I'm putting mine in the right place. I'm going to create an outer folder for it. And then I'll let Unity create the inner folder, I guess, so I can keep versions of it. So this is going to be Dungeon Delver. We don't want it to be a 3D game. So instead of 3D template, pick 2D. When it loads up all of the assets for your game, it'll use the 2D assets instead of the 3D, so your footprint will be much smaller. Got everything set the way you want? Go ahead and create your project.
Doing 2D, right?
Yep. 2D.
Yep. Important small.
So it looks a little different since we have all our 2D assets here. Let's save our scene before we do anything else. I'm going to do save scene as, and this very first scene, let me get here to what they want it named. We do it.
Use it as underscore.
Yeah, he wants underscore scene underscore eagle. So he's just going to mess with us on this one. It's like, yeah, I always did it that way. I'm going to make sure I'm in my scenes folder to save that one. And that's because this is going to be, this scene is going to have a dungeon layout identical to that of the Eagle dungeon in The Legend of Zelda. So that's why he's naming it Scene Eagle. Okay, in our textbook, you'll see when in the setup for this chapter, there's another link to the textbook website. There's also a link to the textbook website on Canvas at the very beginning of our modules where we have the course setup information for downloading Unity and everything. If you go back to there, there's a link to this to the textbook website. But I've got all these assets downloaded for us to the S drive. So you don't need to worry about going to that textbook site to get them, but you might need to at home if you want to grab them. So that being said, use your assets menu to import a package. So the author has saved this package for us so that a lot of the assets and resources we need will already be here. So it's a custom package. I put it on the S drive. So let's see if everybody can get to it. On the S drive, in the CIS folder, under CIS220, under course data, you should see this Dungeon Delver resources folder. Now what we want is the first file, the C35 Dungeon Delver starter.unity package. Click on that and click open. Hopefully it'll all work because they have some comments in the textbook about people having trouble with it. Now whenever you import a Unity package like that, hang on just a second. When you import a Unity package like that, the import is going to pause and show you all of the resources in that package. This would give you an opportunity to deselect some of them if you didn't want everything in the package. We want everything in this package, so just leave everything checked and click import. What's the matter, Edward?
It says failed to import package with error, couldn't be compressed package.
Let's see.
I tried.
Now after you've done that import, look at your project tab and you should have some assets and things that you didn't have before. When you import it, did you import it as a package?
Yeah, package.
Okay.
Do you need a system first?
Did you go as package?
No, I didn't go to package. Sorry, I just.
Yeah, no,
Next the link to where it is in the.
Where's your
yeah, admin doors. The top one. This one here, to start it. Yeah. There's no beer. Then here's the. Yeah. I guess yeah. And then just keep my. You started. Unlimited set. Definitely figure that one out. Give you some time, you just need to restart.
Free space.
Anybody else having trouble doing that export?
Built in, with error, couldn't keep a press package. Try moving.
What's the matter?
Copying it.
I'm trying to do it from my own computer. Yeah. In order to do that, do I, I'm trying to find out what I would do if I'm doing my own press file. Do I just follow the link?
And you download all of the resources from that one.
Would it be a similar process?
Yeah, once you get everything downloaded. Yeah.
I still got the same error. I'm also the guy.
There's a few people that are getting.
Hold on.
The other thing that's out there on the S drive, there is a zip file that is the Dungeon Delver project start. So if you're having issues, you could extract that to your Unity project folder system and then open that in Unity instead of using that import package. Now, notice the reason that that zip file is out there is because of this problem. So it's obviously known and obviously random and happens to different people. So that's why they have the project startup zip file. So if you're having trouble, let's try to get that extracted. It is in that S drive in that same. So if you look at that Dungeon Delver resources, oh, nope, it's not. Let's see what it is. I've got it copied out there. It's available on the website, but I'll get it copied out for you.
So we just go to the website and we download it?
Well, hang on, because you're doing something different, so please don't make me get everybody confused.
Zip of it and Dungeon Delver resources.
Is there? Why is it not showing here to him?
I'm looking at it.
I thought there was.
Yeah, there's a zip file on that.
I was like, I swear it was there looking at Alan's. Okay, so if you're having trouble with the resources, go to the Dungeon Delver resources folder, right click on this zip file and do extract and choose the location to extract to as your Unity project folder, your GitHub folder. So that's where it puts that project, and then you should be able to open it in Unity and already have the resources included. Let's see if we can get there. But you, yes, if you're going to go to their website, the textbook, and then you should just be able to, yeah, just those things. So let me get it.
Well, it could be a zip file, you know, in the project, and I don't know how to push this.
Oh, so go to Unity and do file open.
Go open
it does. It's the same. Unless you use the analog switch button.
Human words.
Program a chain of
Now, as you guys open that zip file, that project, you're gonna get some messages in Unity about different things. So just look at the message and say accept or continue. It's gonna complain about being different versions and switching platforms. Just tell it to do it. And get it all started.
But it's reading nothing.
It might be different. We'll fight with it here. You're doing it. It's trying to. Okay.
So,
Okay,
I'm
it is.
sorry. I just don't want to get anybody.
Maybe it's the word.
We'll see. We'll see.
Well,
If it doesn't, don't worry. I'll just zip up mine and post it to Canvas. Because it should be all set too.
Yeah.
So we could do that.
I think I'll probably use the little short slide.
And then it's in game, and then it's that dungeon delver, so just copy that one. Yeah.
Okay, if that one from the textbook is not working, I'm going to copy mine out to an announcement on our Canvas course.
It worked for me, it didn't work for him. Yeah.
Okay, if you've done the import, go to your project tab and make sure that you have all of these assets. These are the things that were imported by that Unity package. Now, if our computers that don't want to cooperate are still giving us a hard time, see if you can open it. See if you get that open. So where's that? Okay, perfect. So now.
Had that experience. Was not like SAO is another good series. Even at the same level, they're all actually under the so taking on red velocities with the new third record. Not as long as starting at level 5, taking down at level 5. Basically, that dragging showing with not so sad. What's that? Dragon. It's good. It's almost like making it, but it's not.
The latest one that I played is that's the one with lightning in it. 13. Yeah, like 13, 32, and then like, and that's how we actual name of that. You know it. Leather data. Oh, hi, what's up? What is the deal with lost game? Are you supposed to? Last time you asked that. What is it working?
I don't think that
That's the game. That was
started
the
watching the game when
one you did. That's game. What it is? But you did. Whatever you thought.
we're trying to go through this part today and not look different. The one that I get done with, if we start with it next time, it should be okay. So, as long as you guys can see how to chop up the spreadsheet and stuff, I think it'll be fine. Chopping up spreadsheets is. It's such a big project out there. We need to start it. Start having fun.
I think that's still not a problem. And you went up against the building. And you went up against the building.
Which game?
The building is
Actually have not created past the first step. That way, I'm on the second chapter. The start of the second step. And I'm already going to the items all. I'm going to for 5 days straight. Now look around in there and find your spreadsheet in Unity, looking at your resources and things. See what you got while we're waiting here. We're almost all set. Hopefully.
It's called Delver Tile.
Looks like it doesn't have. Okay, you're there. Now go to your.
And here's your I just have one page. The other chapter 8, there's one word. Three times
You know, we have one to do 2D. That's all right. Yours is 3D.
Yeah.
That should be okay. So if it look today, we'll be doing the chopping of the spreadsheet and stuff, so that shouldn't matter. It shouldn't give you guys trouble. We'll start it off at the same spot next time. All together, we'll just do a zip file.
Okay, let's do it. I knew we would have some delays. So we've finally got our project started and we've imported that scene package with all of those resources. Let's see what we've got. Remember, whenever we're working with object-oriented programming, we're doing component-based design, and that's important because we have to think ahead a little bit about how we want the game to work, and then we want to separate things by components, and that allows us to have different people work on different things. So this is a great idea for you guys as team project too, you know, to try to identify what your main components are to split things up for your team. So this project is designed that way, kind of in an object-oriented way. So we have our tiles. So let's go find those. If you look at some of the different assets that you have, you'll see that our prefabs, we just have a few, have some textures. In your resources folder, we have some really interesting things. So we have some data files. If you look at them, you'll see that hex data that we're going to be trying to figure out. And then our Delver tiles are here with all of, that's basically our sprite sheet. Now we have a couple of scripts that have already been created for us. The Spiker script, they say we can attach that to the Spiker prefab after we've done a little bit more work. It's already there for us. And we're going to be creating some more. Now our planned division of labor is we're going to create one script to handle a camera, our tile camera. And this script is going to position the camera. The camera is going to start at the entrance to the dungeon and follow the player into the rooms as they move around. It's going to read the map data, so it's going to figure out, you know, where we are and what sprites need to be delivered to be displayed. And it's going to assign locations to our tiles. Our tiles are going to be each of the different sprites on our sprite sheet. So we're going to refer to those as a tile. Now we'll also have a script then for our tile, and each tile that requires the tile camera has been assigned as a location in a tile. We'll see what they mean a little bit better as we go. But the tile is going to need to keep track of its own position and the sprite that it's displaying, so it can be displaying the correct thing. It's also going to have to manage its own box collider to set things up appropriately. Okay, so we've got everything all set now here in our package and in our project. Let's do a save. We want to save our scene and save our project because we did that import of all of those resources. Now the author mentions, and we should too, that his friend who teaches art at Michigan State University did all of the artwork, because that's important for us developers. Sometimes we've got to do a lot of begging to get somebody to help with the artwork. If you can do them both, you're just awesome. Doesn't happen a lot. All right, so let's set up our cameras. In this project, it's going to be the first time we're going to have more than one camera. Our main camera is going to show the gameplay, but our second camera, we're going to call it GUI camera, is going to show the graphical user interface. So that way we're going to be able to manage each camera independently and make that GUI coding a little less messy than what it was before. So before we can adjust our cameras, let's set up our game pane. Click on your game tab, and you want to find your aspect ratio drop down in your game pane. We're going to set up a 1080p setting. So down at the bottom, click the plus sign to add a new aspect ratio. Bless you. Let's label this thing 1080p. We want to leave it fixed resolution. We want our width to be 1920 and our height to be our 1080. And then we can click OK to save that preset and make sure that that's the one that's selected then for the aspect ratio. That worked the same, you guys, on the 3D. Didn't do anything different. Okay. Now, for our main camera, let's set some of its inspector settings. So I'm going to click on the main camera, and I want to set its transform position. We're going to go to 23.5, a Y value of 5, and a Z value of -10. And we want our rotation to be all zeros and our scale to be all 1, so that looks good. Now your camera settings, where the clear flags drop-down list is. Yes, sir?
So what was the thing for doing with the 1080p?
On your game tab, where it shows your game when you play it.
Yeah, the aspect ratio. Oh. Right next to display one or whatever. You hit the plus sign at the bottom, and then the 1920 by 10.
Yes, sir. So in our game, we want our clear flags to be set to a solid color. We want our background to be black. So what they've done is just 0, 0, 0 for all 3 color codes. And then we can do 255 for that. All right, that's pretty black. We want our projection to be orthographic, our size to be 5.5, and then our viewport rectangle. This is how we're going to kind of split our screen. Pretty cool. We want our viewport rectangle X and Y positions to be 0, but we're going to update our width to be 0.8. And then we're ready to create our second camera. So use your game object menu to add a camera. And let's rename this camera to GUI camera, GUI. I'm going to put a space there. I think they have a space, but we might have to come back and rename that. But it looks like it has a space in it. Now, in our GUI camera, let's set our transform. First of all, our position, we're going to make -100, 0, and -10. And then our rotation, we want all 0s, our scale, all 1s. For our clear flags, instead of a skybox, we want a solid color again. This color, they want us to just, they say set it to gray for now. So let's, where are you? Come on, let me bring that stupid thing up. There it is. So our gray that they would like is 128, 128, 128, 255. Okay, so that is a great gray. We want our projection to be orthographic again. Size 5.5. In our viewport rectangle, this time we're going to leave, or we're going to set X, sorry, to the 0.8 value. And then our W, our width will be 0.2. So notice how that just made that camera area be this little rectangle over here, which is kind of neat the way it split the screen. Now we have with our camera associated an audio listener. We really don't want 2 audio listeners going on in our scene. So let's remove this one from our GUI camera. So you're going to do your little gear drop down to remove that component. I don't know if we can run it right now. Let's try it. I didn't try it last night. Not much going on. But yeah, it looks kind of neat with the split screen like that. Like that. Now notice that because we were doing that with our cameras, the scene itself, you can't really tell that that's going on. So that's kind of neat. So let's save. So let's look at our dungeon data. In our resources folder, we saw that we have those weird data files and all of our images. So of course our Delver tiles we saw was our all of our image file information. And Delver collisions.txt is a text file that holds collision information for each of the tile sprites. So we'll be looking at those. Delver data.txt is a text file containing the map information for each of the tile sprites in the Delver tiles ping file. So we'll be looking at that too. So first, let's get our tiles all set up. Select your Delver tiles file in your resources folder. Now, when you select it, we're going to set some settings over here in the inspector. So we want to make sure that our texture type is default. It's 2D, that's fine. Expand the advanced options. Texture type, where's our sprite mode? Most of that looks pretty good, but I'm not seeing. Texture type is the big problem up there. It's set to default and we need to change that. So let's change that texture type to Sprite. And then we're going to be telling Unity that this is a Sprite sheet. And we want to choose the 2D and UI Sprite. Now you should see your options change, and that'll give us a little bit more control over that Sprite sheet. Our Sprite mode should be set to multiple. We did make each sprite a 16 pixel. It is compressed in a tight format in that Sprite sheet. I want to look at some of these other settings before we go into the Sprite Editor. Our RGB is set appropriately. Our input texture of alpha is appropriate. Our alpha is transparency is good. Now the remove matte is an option that isn't available in our text. So we're going to leave it set as is. All the rest look like they're pretty good. So we are ready to apply these changes. Note the apply button down towards the bottom of those inspector properties. We have to apply those changes that we made before we can use the Sprite Editor to chop up our sprites. Okay, so once we've applied those settings, click the Sprite Editor button. Now the Sprite Editor, where it says slice up at the very top, click that because we want to change the type again. So again, ours is not automatic. We're going to use grid by cell size. Our pixel size on ours is 16 by 16. Leave the pivot setting at center, and when you have those settings set, you're ready to click slice. Now when you click slice, the Sprite Editor is going to take this image file and use that 16 by 16 setting to chop this up into multiple tile images. So when you slice it, you should see all that happen. So let's slice it.
Where is the Sprite Editor option? Where you can open it? Mine's opening as a PDF.
It is, when you're over here in the inspector, the button is right here. So if you're not seeing the button, change your texture type. Make sure that your texture type is this Sprite 2D. Do you see it? Is it showing up now?
Yeah, it converted back to a default.
Yeah, it'll do that. Is it working? Do you see anything happening?
Yeah.
There, it's showing up in the Sprite Editor now how it's going to slice them all. So I've got all of the grid lines available here. Now, because we've applied everything, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, make sure there's, oh, there it is. In the Sprite Editor, now that you can see all the grid lines, we actually still have to click that little teeny apply button to get it to generate all those tile files. So do you see that? Apply. And as you apply, You'll notice down here in your resources folder, your Delver tiles has this little arrow now. If you click that, you'll see all of the different sub tile files that were generated for it. Did it work? Do you see them?
Which glitter are we using?
Let's grid by cell size. And you want it 16. 16 by 16. So everybody got them? Sliced them? Woohoo! Good job. We didn't, did you, I don't know how awesome that is. I don't think you realize. But you didn't have to go download 27 different tools from the internet to do that, because Unity lets you do it, which is a very big deal. So as far as being a developer goes, that's a really big deal. So that's very nice that we were able to just split all that stuff. So let's save. Now that's the kind of process that, you know, as a developer, sometimes people are really hard on themselves and they say, I can't remember how to do things, or I'm not good. This is the kind of stuff that points out how you can't possibly remember everything, all of these little details, especially when you're only going to do this once in a while, once in a great while when you're first getting started with something. And it works. Oh, you got it. Got it? Oh. That sounds tired.
Well,
Oh, no.
Yes. If there's anything else, I'm sure we'll run into it. We'll try to figure that out.
Woohoo! Okay, so now we have all of our Sprite sheet all chopped up into all of our pieces.
I might slice it, revert back and does not give me immediately,
The options. Did you
did you hit apply?
that little apply button?
I keep doing that. And then whenever I exit out of it,
Like
none of the
ignoring you.
assets transfer through. See, I'll do it again. Slice, size, slice, apply. Once that gets done, I'll be able to start this. And I have a bunch of copies of the map.
You should have enough. Yeah, because even in the book, it shows a completely different picture. So that must be a Unity update that it hides all of those from you instead of just letting you see that. I think my project at home probably has 3 or 4 sets of them too. Couldn't find this silly thing. All right. Let's look at one at delverdata.txt. Delverdata.txt. Now, when I look here, there is Delver data and Delver data _hat. We want the one that's just Delver data. So if you click on it once and you look it over here in this preview, you're going to see that it doesn't look like a lot of readable information to us. So let's go ahead and open it in Visual Studio.
Oh my goodness.
Come on, why did you open in?
Is your default not set anymore?
Do what?
Default is set. Your default set to text now instead of Visual Studio. What happened?
So let's see, we're going to have to do something.
You can hit Open C# project.
Let's try it. Open C# project. I did not have this trouble at home when I double clicked on it at Open Visual Studio. Surprise, surprise, huh?
You might try project settings there in the file.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to care about. Text files. Let's try preferences. External tools. External script editor where it says open by file extension. I'm just going to set it to Visual Studio 2017. We had changed that already. Have our computers been revisited? Are they going to work even worse? Okay, let's change that setting and see if it'll open. Ah.
The numbers are in like weird.
You can click cancel here. Do I?
The numbers Windows firewall.
Yeah, you can cancel. That's okay. Yeah, it's supposed to look like this. So this is really cool. What this is this is hex information about which tile goes where in the dungeon. So this is your dungeon map. So if you look through it and think about it, they say that it's backwards because when we read files in our programs, we're going to read this text file. We read from beginning to end. So the end will be the last thing that we have. So that will be where we'll start putting out our tiles. So all of the dots in the actual file could also be represented as zeros, but they changed it to dots for us just so we could see it a little bit better. So where all the dots are will be some sort of default tile. But then like here where I've got this 5-2, that's going to be tile 5-2 needs to show there. And then like if I look over, there's a bunch of tile 1D. So we could look and see which tile got assigned that 1D name and which one has that 1D position in our sprite sheet. And we know that's the tile that's going to be displayed there. So this is a layout file for our castle. So it's got all of the layout. And this is how the castle will be built with our tiles from our sprite sheet.
Do you know how this file was made? Like how would I make a map with hex values?
Well, I think that originally people did it by hand.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So this it wouldn't be that hard because now you've got this one. You could take it and copy it, and you could just do a change all, you know, and be like, instead of every place I had tile, you know, 6-8, I'm going to change it to this other tile to make it a winter scene or something like that. So you would just be able to change kind of like your borders around it. But that's part of the fun of doing the art for it too. It's figuring out, you know, how you can change the whole scene without making a massive impact on things like this. So this is just one way that a 2D game is going to be built. Lots of different ways to do it. You know, because you think, like I mentioned earlier, one of the only other ones that I've done that was 2D a lot were the side scrollers. And with that, you just have the image that's kind of playing behind you, so you don't have to worry as much. So this is just the way they came up with, probably way back, the original developers of Zelda and some of those early adventure games. So we'll just make a hex map.
Technically, I actually watched an interview with people when Super Mario Maker came out for the Wii U. They actually talked about when they made the first Super Mario Brothers, they used graph paper actually to
And did it. And see, that's, you could actually see it, or I can, because I've used a lot of graph paper in my life for things like that. But you would sit down with that piece of graph paper and just start marking X's where you wanted, you know, your hallways to be, and then you would slowly add layers onto that to say, okay, I think this should be this icon. But that would be how all of your Mario scenes and everything were built early on, that had stuff. So really cool. But yeah, you could change it. So that would be a neat thing for us to try to change it. And one of the items that they actually supply in the resources that we have for the game is a level editor. So it's something that would make it a lot friendlier to update this so that you could change it around and stuff and try different things. That'd be fun. So that's how we're going to build the level, is kind of with this map text file. So that's where we need to be worried about the hex data. In your textbook, if you start looking at it, where they're talking about converting from decimal to hex, for some reason, when whoever typed it, they started getting off. And so notice they end up with the number 10 under the number 16, and that would be incorrect because we saw it's the letter F that stands for the number 16. So it kind of got scooched over a little bit. So that is an error in our book. So whenever we're doing hex, they do mention letters A through F can be upper or lowercase. They chose lowercase in that Delver data file because they thought it was easier to read, which is true. And uppercase D looks a lot like a lot of other letters, and hex files can be pretty hard to read. So he mentions there are exactly 256 tiles in that image. That's the sprite sheet. So you have, looking at your hex values, the first hex digit is always the row, and the second hex digit is always the column when you're referencing that image. So I said that wrong when we were looking at it at first, because I said that it would start at position 1 and work its way across, which is true if we're just looking at a decimal representation. But if we're looking at a hex representation, it ends up working out in a pattern where that first digit is your row number and that second digit is your column number. So you come up with like a matrix, a two-dimensional array. So we're ready. Let's take a break for a moment. It is 9:06. Let's start these scripts when we get back. Let's come back at about 10 after, 12 after, whatever you need. It is in that big window right there. I think it's, do you know where person? Is it on the second floor or just on the first floor?
So you're gonna go out of this building. Just walk. Yeah, except so you're gonna go in the doors, and there's gonna be a big sign on the wall, and there's gonna be like a hallway right here with doors to the outside. You're gonna take a right in the hallway, and it's just right in front of you.
was actually gonna say, speaking of Zelda, funny thing is, I actually did learn that the Japanese version of Zelda was a little bit different.
Was
from
it?
The American version.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that there was that they took out of the game completely was there's an enemy that you attack. I think it was like a dark nut is what they called it. But
Uh-huh.
I know it was I forgot the name of it.
Uh-huh.
Basically you blew into a microphone or you would yell into a microphone. And
So
would
it was
kill the
a
enemy.
voice? Oh, wow. So that was an early try to
And,
see if that would work.
And I think the part that really amazes me, and I didn't even know that, I didn't really recognize this with the new indie games, but like Shovel Knight, they actually put in old FM channels from the Famicom.
Uh-huh.
In a lot of NES games that we had here, we just use square waves for our games, but they had an extra channel added to their game. That, let me give you an example. It sounds, you'll notice a difference with it, but essentially with Zelda, this is kind of what it sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
It had an extra, had a FM wave is what that was. And I was just impressed that they were able to get an FM radio wave to go. Yeah, they had a lot of different things with it too.
I am just not a Zelda fan. That music and everything. I mean, my kids would, oh. Or Zelda again. Kids loved it.
Interestingly enough, a lot of the games that come out now are just fully orchestrated. It's just, I've never cared for the more linear aspect of it.
So you guys want to hear a funny story?
Oh yeah.
It's kind of a sad story. Yesterday when I was going home from work, over on Barnes by O'Reilly's, there were two guys, and there was a guy down on the sidewalk, like with all his stuff, like he couldn't walk any further, sort of thing. And the other guy was standing there, like kind of worrying back and forth. You could tell he was obviously distressed, didn't know what to do because his friend was down on the ground, you know, and he didn't. You could tell it's a couple of homeless guys. And so I felt bad for him. And as I was driving away, I thought, well, I should send this lady on Facebook I know who has, like, she has a person who runs out and tries to help homeless people that are in serious distress, you know, to try to keep bad things from happening and stuff like that. And I thought I should message her. And I'm not very far from where this was. And I thought, well, that's dumb. I could just get a couple bottles of water and take back up there. And I knew my husband was home. I thought, make my husband go with me because I'm not going to, because I'm a chicken. And I'm not just going to give these homeless guys water without my, and so I got my husband and he's like, oh God, all right. And so we took a Coke and a bottle of water. And I said, and just give him a little bit of money, you know. And so my husband cooperated with me and he went and he gave him the stuff and he gets back in the car and they did both get up, and right as we pulled in, a security car pulled in behind us, and they were getting ready to start getting harassed, you know, for sure, which they deserved. And anyways, my husband was like, well, good job, honey. That was your good deed for the day. You did good. And I was like, well, I don't know, you know, blah, blah, blah. What can you do? Springfield won't take care of its homeless, stuff like that. And I get home and we have this Nextdoor app. Have you heard of it? It's like Facebook for your neighborhood. And people post things, you know, like they lost their dog or whatever. So I've just had it for a couple of weeks, and it popped up and said somebody got jumped. And I looked, so I look at the post, and it was like 8 hours before. So where this happened was Barnes and Chestnut. I look at the Nextdoor app, and this guy says, two guys jumping through backyards jumped me this morning and beat me up, and the only reason that he ended up being okay was because somebody else drove by and stopped and yelled, and so they took off running. And he gave a description of the two guys. It was at Barnes and Grand, and I'm like, well, great. I think we just gave the two guys that jumped that guy some water and some money, so we rewarded them. So we decided that it was still a good deed because maybe it would keep them from jumping somebody last night. But pretty sure based on the description, it was those two guys. Isn't that sad? Isn't that crazy? Springfield needs to do something. It's crazy. There's no homeless shelters or anything. So, you know, Springfield, they have that attitude, if you build it, they will come, so don't build it. That's their whole attitude. Send them to cities that have homeless shelters. My daughter says Springfield and Atlanta are the only two cities in the country, you know, over a certain population that have chosen that route of not having any sort of resources for the homeless. And so Atlanta and Springfield have ended up with like some of the largest homeless populations of any cities, because it's like the opposite of what you would think would happen. In New Orleans, the homeless, it's really bad. But if they want to leave, they can go to the bus depot. You can say, I want a bus ticket home. And the bus depot doesn't even ask that. Where do you want to go? And they give them a bus ticket. And the city, out of their homeless resources fund, pays for all these bus tickets to let people leave. Well, Springfield won't do that. So that means if they get here, they're trapped. And any other city will like, sure, we'll send you on down the road wherever you want to go. Springfield are like, no, we would like to keep you. We'll keep you here, but we're not going to give you resources. I don't know why. But anyway. Yeah, the bus idea is pretty key. Yeah, keep them there. Because, you know, that's really a lot of what they like. A lot of them. This is where they're in that situation. Like that lifestyle. I just feel really dumb. My daughter all the time said, homeless person
And the soul rifle, but that's for the air and it's
treating resources available to them.
like that one box.
She's like, people who want to help should give money to the facilities. You know, the help shouldn't give it to them individually. Because she was with somebody homeless, she's just happy with that. I do. So, yeah, she just laughed at me. Ha, ha.
See, for me, it's hard because I understand that hard, but is it like chooses to be in that position? But I also I feel like that my patience with it has declined as I've lived in Springfield because
It's just a
it's
bad
so
problem
present.
here.
And like I live close to like campus, like over by MSU. So for me, you know, when I go to the gas station, it's annoying for me sometimes because it's like I'll specifically sit in front of the gas station to like get your attention and look at you like, while you're walking. It's like I want to help you, but if I help every single person I saw, I'm like I would have zero money for myself, and I'd be homeless too. Like, you know, and it's a pain, but then on one side, it's like I don't want to be like cruel about it, but on one side, it's I feel like I have to go and do all these things in order to make myself not homeless.
Right.
Like,
Why won't they? Well, like my daughter says that she works with so many homeless. A lot of them, in New Orleans anyways, a lot of them are like veterans that have issues, you know, or just regular people with issues. So most of them would qualify for some sort of assistance. But like if you're a veteran who's getting disability, you have to fill out paperwork once a year to keep that coming. And these people aren't capable of getting that paperwork, that form filled out once a year to keep themselves getting income to stay in a facility or anything. We need some sort of support system for these people that have these mental disabilities that aren't able to even do that basic kind of stuff for themselves to keep themselves in a house and stuff. So the people that don't want that, that are addicts and that are just out there on the street because they want to be, you know, that's a different story, but when it's people who really would be able to survive if they just had that little teeny bit of help of filling out some sort of paperwork to keep all your benefits coming. They built a great big giant VA hospital down there. And so the veterans come from everywhere to go to the big hospital. And then the hospital will do things like tell them they have to come back in 3 weeks for something. And so they'll just stay in New Orleans, but they can't afford like hotels and things like that. And so they end up just kind of being on the street waiting for their next appointment at the VA hospital. So it's like the hospital down there is making a problem worse instead of better. So we have that new one that's going to be built here in Springfield. I wonder if it'll have the same effect on us where it's even more. I don't know.
It probably will, but I think we already have such a high population of it.
My daughter, after she'd been in New Orleans for a year, she was talking about welfare and just, assistance of any sort. And she gets so sick of it down there. She's like, I say, just cut it all off. Let them fight it out on the streets. And I was like, whoa. And she's like, you work with these people every day. You'll see they need to just fight it out. Bring the population down. I'm like, dang, Heather. She's put her in charge. I think that we have a lot of people with that. Everybody's got their attitudes. Well, he's not back. We're going to have to go ahead, though. I was waiting on our one person who had run over to the Career Center, but we'll get him caught up. We don't want to wait forever. We got too much to do. Okay, so let's create a script. We want to go back to Unity, and I'm going to go into our scripts folder, __ scripts, because we want it to sort to the very top, and I want to create a C# script. Let's name this script tile. And then we want to open it in Visual Studio. Mine jumped to Visual Studio, but it didn't open the script, which is weird. It's doing that. Okay, so in our tile script, we're going to create one method to set the tile. Now, when we create this method, we're going to have some errors here at first until we create our other class that's going to support this one. So just expect that, but this one is pretty short. It won't take us long to create it. So we want to use the header. And we're going to say that this is set dynamically. And then what do we want in that section? We're going to have some public variables. We want an integer named x and an integer named y. And then we want an integer named tile num. And then the method we're going to create is going to be called setTile. I'm going to go ahead and mark it as public. I'm going to delete the update method because I don't want to be overriding that with an empty method. Now in our setTile method, we're going to need some parameters. So we're going to expect to receive an integer with our x position. We'll call it EX. An integer with our y position, so we'll call it EY. And then an integer with our tile number. Now we're going to do a parameter update in this and say that whatever is passed to us, we want to subtract 1 from it. So that's kind of a neat way of handling that. Instead of us having to subtract 1 from it when we use it in our code, we'll just subtract 1 from it in our parameter list. We're going to set our class variables for the values passed to us by this. If you look at this setTile method, it's really kind of a constructor method. but it's kind of a hidden constructor because it has a setter name, but it's really just setting up our tile. So the first thing that we want to do after we set up our variables is set our local position. And we're going to create a vector3 object for that position. We're going to use our x variable, our y variable, and then 0 is our z. So whatever was passed to our method when it was called, that's the position that we're going to use to set up this tile.
So I got a quick question.
Uh-huh.
With that e tile num equals -1, that's specifically saying whatever e tile's number is, subtract 1 from it?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's just setting it to -1.
Oh, okay.
It's
so
just
is
setting it. Yeah, it's
Okay.
setting it. So we would be subtracting if we had minus equal. So glad you pointed that out. Yeah. I was giving it extra capabilities. I was making it a magic number. Good job. You are on it. I'm like all into the magic this morning. Okay, so we've got our transform position set now. Let's go to our game object and set its name. So we're going to give it a name kind of like we would build a string value for a 2-string output or something like that. And we're going to name this tile whatever the x value is, but we're going to use the formatter D3. Now D3 says this is a decimal number, but I want it to be 3 characters long, take up 3 spaces. So no matter how big the number is, it'll take up 3. So we'll take a look at it as we get going. Now after the property x value, we want to add more to our name value. We're going to put an actual letter X in there, and then we'll add the value of Y. And again, we're going to do a 2-string and apply the D3 formatting to it. So with our D3 formatting, what they mention in the textbook is, since we said it was supposed to be 3 characters, if we had an X value of 23 and a Y value of 5, that would give us a name formatted like this. 3 characters, the letter X, 3 characters. So we're basically using that hexadecimal value is the name of our tile. Now we're going to put an if statement in. If the tile number is still -1, then we want to update it. We're going to call this class that we haven't created yet our tile camera class, and we're going to be using its getMap method. That getMap method is going to want our X and Y value. So don't worry about that tile camera error that you're getting right now. We're going to fix that when we create that class. Yours isn't? Something's wrong. We'll figure it out. Now we're going to set our class property tile num variable equal to that e tile num that we just calculated. And then we're going to do a get component. And we want to do a get component on our sprite renderer component. The sprite renderer component is going to have a sprite property that we want to update, and we want to set that to, again, the output from our tile camera class method that we're going to create. That method is going to be sprites. And our sprites property in our tile camera class is going to be an array, of all of our sprites. So we're basically saying this, we want to set the sprite value that's maintained within the sprite renderer component of our tile. So for every tile that we go to display now, we're giving it a name and we're giving it a sprite. That's all we need for this class. So let's do a save all here. So Unity is going to be really mad at us for those errors. So that's okay because we're going to fix them. Did you find it, Alex?
I was just finishing up that last one.
Oh, okay. Let me know. There you go.
Why is that dot
Oh,
Sprites
actually-
all capitals?
Actually,
Because they want, that's what they're going to name their properties. I don't know why. It's
Is it a constant then? Is that why-
no, it's not. It's a property. So they just kind of violate some of the conventions we've been taught in the past, which is good because I like for you guys to see that those are conventions, not rules. Our author is all about the Unity. He's not about the C#. And so we see where he can use some C# training.
I got the book, so don't worry.
You got it. Oh, okay, you've got it. All right, so I'm going to go back to Unity and create another C# script. This one is going to be our tile camera that was causing us trouble. So I want to double click on that to open it in Visual Studio. For our tile camera class, we're going to have some static variables, which is great, right? Because we only have that one camera. So we don't want to have multiple instances of these variables that are going to be associated with our camera. We're going to have multiple tiles, but our camera is going to be focused on one. So we're going to have a private integer for our width and one for our height. We're going to have an integer array called map. What does that comma within those square brackets do to that array?
Parallel array.
Not quite. What is it?
Is it not parallel? It's the one multi-dimensional one.
Two-dimensional. So yes, you're thinking that, all right. So that will be a two-dimensional array. Now we're going to create another, oops, sorry, this is going to be a public variable. This public variable is going to be an array of sprites.
It's supposed to be okay.
The name will be, so we want our name to be all sprites, all caps. And just like Dylan was asking, this is just something that our author decided to do, or he saw this convention used in another game, where because these were all, as far as I can tell, because they're all static variables, is why he has them all in uppercase. Because they do all have that one thing in common, that they're all static. So we may decide that we don't like that convention, but it's a nice convention. We're going to have our tile anchor transform. And then we'll have one more array, a two-dimensional array for our tiles. Now we have some additional variables. Square bracket. We were to use the header specification and say these are set in inspector. We want text asset called map data. We want a texture 2D, and we're going to call that map tiles. We want another text asset for our collisions. And then finally, we're going to have an instance of a tile called tile prefab. Now we don't need a start method. We're going to use the awake method instead. And in our awake method, all we're going to do is call our load map method. Bless you. Now we're not going to load our map in our awake method because we're going to be calling our load map method from other classes, right? We saw that. So we need to make that our own method so that we can call it ourselves and control it more so than if it was using one of the standard Unity events. So let's create our method. Our load map method is going to have some calls in it to some other methods. So let's get those set up. We're going to have some getters and some setters. So I'm going to come to my curly brace that's the end of my load map method that we're going to create here in a minute. And I'm going to create a static method for set map. So set underscore map. This is that one that we were calling from our tile class. Now we saw before that the set map is going to expect an integer for X, an integer for Y, and an integer for the tile number. We'll call that third integer in our setMap method tnum. Now they have an interesting comment. They say additional security or a breakpoint could be set here. And you'll see why. Let's think about it. We're going to start with an if statement. And if our X property is less than 0, or our X property is greater than or equal to our width property, or our Y property is less than 0, or our Y property is greater than or equal to our height. If any of those are true, we're going to return because that would create an out of range exception. And that's just what we know about our map. Well, we don't know, thank goodness someone else knew. But we would know if we had developed it. So we're just going to return and say you can't do that. Now, if that's okay though, if all of our parameters are correct, we're going to set a map at position XY equal to our tile num. So we're setting these tiles on our map. Now, why are they saying that additional security or a breakpoint would be a good thing here? What kind of security can you think of would happen?
In case something goes wrong,
Like what?
like
You're right. I'm thinking of like Minecraft, where you have different levels of users, right? And you might have some users that aren't allowed to do this process. They aren't allowed to set the map to a different map because they're going to do something bad or whatever. So you've got it set up to where you have to be an admin on this server to run this process or something like that, because you don't want to be able to set it up unless you have authority. Okay, so that's our set map. Let's do a get map. I'm going to put it above the set map method because I'm just going to put them in the same order they are in our text. Now, the get map is actually a C# property, right? It's a getter. We're going to allow people to get information about our map. But we haven't used the C# automatic properties setup. We're creating our own getter. We can do that if we want. And in this one, our own getter, we're going to need to know what X and Y positions they're concerned with. So we're going to ask for those as parameter values. Oops, make those floats. Sorry. I was looking one down, not ints. Now, in our getMap method, we are going to use an integer value, tx, and we're going to set that by using the float x value that was passed to us, but we're going to round it. So instead of just letting it get truncated, any decimal places, we're going to round it up to an integer value, which is a super handy function that our business programming book should show us too, but they don't. We're going to do the same thing for our y, round it up to an integer, but we're going to subtract 0.25. Oh, got a typo, huh? Round. And then we're going to return oh, I'm just trying to give you guys some debugging experience. Where's Word when I need it? Shouldn't this be fixing this for me? There we go. That's how it should look, I think.
It says it's incorrect. Well, you're trying to return with a void type.
It's all right. We haven't created that method yet. So let's create it. So what I'm trying to return is going to be produced by a call to our getMap method that expects integers. So it's an overload. So our float method is going to call our integer method to return an integer value after it's done this rounding to set up the x and y variables correctly. So for our actual getMap method, we're going to start out with an if statement again. If x is less than 0, or x is greater than or equal to our width, or y is less than 0, or y is greater than or equal to our height, if any of those are true, we're going to return -1 because we would get an out of range exception if we didn't, if we tried to do anything else. And if it does work, we're going to return the tile at this position. And we will be creating that in just a moment. So it should quit griping at you. All right, why haven't you stopped griping at us? Because there's errors in this one. So we're just going to have some errors for a second. Hopefully that's all of our errors, but we should have plenty of time to resolve them. So let's do our load map method, which should end up cleaning up all of our errors. So let's start out in our load map method.
Can you scroll down to the store?
Sure, where do you want?
It's right there.
Right there? Yeah. Okay. Now in our load map, we're going to start out by creating an anchor for our tiles. All our tiles will have this anchor as their parent. We're actually going to create this game object dynamically. We've done that before. Create a new game object named tile_anchor. Then we're going to set our tile anchor variable that we created in our class. We're going to set that variable equal to the transform position of this new game object that we just created. So notice that those two instances of that word tile_anchor are not really related to each other. The first one is just the name, the internal name property of this game object instance that is named Geo. The second one is we're taking our variable tile anchor and setting it to that instance's transform position. Lots of things. All right. Load all of the sprites from map tiles. So we've split up all our sprites or sliced that sprite sheet. So let's put them into an array. We want our sprites array to be equal to our resources. We want to load all of the instances that are type sprite from our map tiles.name file. So remember, we looked at that map tiles.name file, and that was the layout. So our load all function that's available in Unity. We'll see what that does for us. Now, let's do some more work. Read in the map data. We're going to create an array of strings called lines. And we're going to use our map data text file, mapdata.text. And we're going to use the split function. Now, some of you have seen that in C# and some of you haven't. What the split function is going to do is look for every instance of this character that we send in as a parameter. So in this case, it's the new line character. So if I have a file that has my name, and then a new line, and then my last name, and a new line, and then the next person's name, and then a new line, and their last name. What this split function will do is take all of this string and create an output array. The array will have its first entry being the first string that was found in this string to split. The next entry in the array will be the next string when we're splitting by the new line character. And it will continue splitting out strings for every time it finds that new line character or until it gets to the end of the string. So we'll end up with this array with these 4 values that were split out. So in our map data text file, we have some new line characters to indicate an individual row of that map. So that's what this statement is going to do, is create this lines array with each row of our map. Now we're going to set our height variable, which kind of like how many rows are there, or how many characters are there in this line, sorry. Now we're going to create another array of strings called tile nums. So we're taking our very first line and we're splitting out wherever we see zeros. So remember, those zeros were going to be the positions where we didn't really have a tile or didn't need to worry about it. And then we're going to end up with an array of all of the tile numbers that we need on that line.
Should it be
A dot inside there. It looks like it should have something. Oh, no. We'll try it. It doesn't show it, but it looks like we need something.
Isn't a file, dots.
There were dots everywhere. Yeah. We'll try those dots. We could end up having to refer to our textbook update for that one. Then our W variable is going to be how many different tile numbers do we have, did we end up with from that split. Okay, we're going to use a system globalization parameter. And again, the people that have done some of the REPLs have seen this, others may not. We use the system globalization to set our location in the globe. So for us to set our currency format properly, we might use globalization and say we're in the English US type zone. For this globalization, we're going to be setting the number styles property of the globalization class. And we want to set it to hex num, which means we're going to be using hex numbers instead of integer numbers. Or at least that variable will. Now, in our hex num, here's where we're actually going to set it. I was kind of backwards. So first we're saying we're going to create a new variable called hex num. It's going to be an instance of the number styles data type available in the globalization class. And then the next line says hex num uses the number style hex number. So anything that we put in that is going to be interpreted as a hex number instead of a decimal number. So we're almost there. We're so close to being ready to try it. Let's place the map data into a 2D array for faster access. Finally, we're going to use that map variable. We're going to say our map array is a new array of integers, and we want its size to be based on our W and H properties. And then we're going to use a for loop. Now, we're going to have a nested for loop, so our outer for loop is going to be controlled by an integer named J. And we want to start with it at 0. We're going to run while J is less than our H variable. every time we change the value of j, we're going to update our tile nums variable. So the value of j is going to be used to walk through all of the lines. We're going to take the line that's being pointed to by this value of j and split it, again, assuming that they want us to use that dot. But in the text, it doesn't actually show the split character, so we could have trouble there. Now we're going to go into our inner for loop, and our inner for loop is going to be controlled by an integer named I. We're going to start it at 0, and again, run it as long as I is less than W. And then within this for loop, we're going to look at our tile numbers array at this position and see if it equals those dots. If it does, we're going to say that the map tile at this position is not 1. Otherwise, the tile at this position of I sub j is the tile from our tile nums array. And the hex number. Now, thank goodness we're going to put some debugging code in here. I'm going to label these. This is the end of our for and end of our for. So we want to get in the right place. Now, after both of those for loops, we need a couple of print statements so that we can see what's going on. Let's print out parsed, and then we're going to add the length of our sprites table and the word sprites, so we can see how many sprites have been handled. And then our second printout, we're going to say map size plus our W variable plus the statement wide by. So we want our map size to print out here. So our first message should say we parsed however many sprites. Our second message should say our map size was this width by this height. Let's save everything. How are we looking on errors?
The returns are still giving.
Okay.
I think, like you said earlier, we're trying to return with the void method.
Let's make it an int. Does that make everybody happy? Our get map, what are we? We are returning an int out of our get map with our floats also. Okay, so our set map should be void. Our get map that uses floats should return an int, and our get map that uses ints should return an int. Does that look better?
Can you scroll down to get map with the lowercase e?
For get map returns, -1 is still.
Oh, and there's a problem. There it is. My get map method doesn't have all uppercase.
I was wondering.
Yeah, since we're doing an overload, those have to be exactly the same. And I had not made it all uppercase because that's so on standard. My fingers can't even do it. It's like, what? What are we doing here? Sure.
The return for me on the first kit map is still mad.
Did you make it an int?
Uh-huh. It says the name free. Oh wait.
Do you see it?
Okay, got it.
Great.
It was spelled wrong. I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, save everything, and then I want to flip over to your tile class, that first one we created. Let's make sure all of the errors have been resolved in that class. Mine looks good. Does everything look okay there? Okay, we have a lot of connections to make in Unity. In which one? The tile one? Here you go. Those right there? Okay.
Tile camera.
Okay. All those? Why is it mad about these? Resharper. Inconsistent modifiers, declaration, order. I don't even know what it means. Oh, it wants public first. Let's do that. I'll agree with Resharper on that one. We should have our access mode first. We'll give it that with those green squigglies. Will it fix it for me? Alt, enter.
It's not giving me any problems about that.
Oh, it's just these green squiggly lines. Is your Resharper turned off? You might not be getting Resharper messages. No, they're green. Because, yeah, you might not get Resharper messages depending on what you said that very first time when Visual Studio opened, and
I get it.
took a while. So it's not a big deal, but it's right. We like to see that access mode first. I go along with our book on most things, but for that one, we'll go along with Resharper. All right, I'm going to do a save all and go to Unity to try to get everything connected. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to look at our prefabs. Got some things there. I want to fix up our tile. Let me find it. Sorry, there's something that we should have done at top that we were looking at that thing and I didn't do it. Okay, so we sliced our thing. Where did we create our tile?
In the script.
No, in our, after we sliced, we looked at our Delver data text file.
In resources.
And then we started with our tile class. Ha, there it is. Okay, we want to create a sprite object. So on your game object menu, we want a 2D object, a sprite. Now this sprite object is going to be our tile. So name it tile. Then find your tile script. And let's associate your tile script with that tile sprite object. That should be all we need to do with it. Let's go to your prefabs folder and drag your tile onto your prefabs folder to make a prefab. And then let's delete it from the hierarchy. Okay, that looks good. Now, the other things that we need to do, we want to attach our tile camera script to our main camera. And I'm going to make sure I got that attached. There it is, tile camera, should be on our main camera. When you're looking at your tile camera script in Inspector, yes, sir? Where do you have error?
It says.
All right. So we've got that associated. So we need to set all of these variables now, all of our inspector variables. So go to your resources, and we want to set our map data to our Delver data file. We want our map tiles to be set to our Delver tiles. We want our map collisions to be set to our Delver collisions. And then we need to go to our prefab folder to set our tile prefab. I don't know, hang on just a sec. I'm not sure what they're saying here, but they actually have a comment that you have to assign the tile from the _prefabs folder of the project pane. Because this is of the type tile instead of game object, you must drag it from the project pane to the slot in the inspector. Clicking the target next to tile prefab in the inspector will not work. So make sure you do the drag and drop instead of clicking the circle here to go locate it. Now, if you've noticed, I always do the drag and drop, so you might have started doing it a different way, that's fine. But for this one, we want to be careful. Won't let you? Hmm.
No. Make you guys move up here front. Yeah, we're okay here at the end. I'll definitely save everything for you. What you got?
I don't know if you find 29. And then it's that.
Oh, tiles camera.
You scroll up to the top and you can see the typo that you created. Yeah. So you want that T after. That should fix it. So check your last one that same way. To be able to find it.
All right, can we run it? You should be able to run it, but we're not going to see much. What we're going to see right now is our messages from our width and height stuff. Yeah, well, okay, we're not going to see the messages then. Input string was not in the correct format. So let me see where that is. Let's go find it. It was
Tile camera.
do you see it? Tile camera dot load map at line 60. So right before that, let's print something out. Now, what are we doing there that it could be upset about? It says that we don't have a valid string, so maybe we should print out whatever our tile nums at position I is, and then let's print out what our hex num is before we hit that error. And let's see if that'll even help us, because we're kind of learning here what's going on with this hex numbering and pulling these sprites off. So it might just get us started a little bit. I'm going to save all and go back to Unity and stop and run that again. I'm going to clear on play or clear so that I know for sure I'm looking at new messages.
Okay, that's the same error again. Yep.
Good, so let's look at our, do we get any messages from our console?
Tile camera line 62 and 22. '22 is where we called load map.
Is it?
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Okay, so it's just showing you your order of calls in your program. So our problem is back still on that line 62. And when I printed out tile nums sub I, I'm not seeing anything in my printout. So I'm going to add more to that print statement. So I'll print like contents of tile nums plus that variable to see what's going on. And then I think I'll do the same thing for our other one. Contents of hex num. I'll save it all. And then go back to Unity and run it. And I'm going to clear everything. Yeah, it looks like tile nums is just like not anything that we can see anyhow. And then our hex num has the value hex number, which doesn't seem like a very good value for right now, considering what we want to do here. But let's check, maybe that does mean something. I want to look at this int.parse, because whenever we've done an int.parse, we always just pass the one thing we want parsed. So what is that hex num parameter? So let's do C# int.parse. Yeah, so parse string, comma, number style. So it should convert it. So we're going to have to do some debugging. Now, I know you guys are working on your projects, your group projects. So keep working on those. Next week, I'll be gone at skills. So we're going to have to leave these bugs just hanging around for a while and be able to resolve them right yet. We'll get it, and we'll get it to work. And we'll have plenty of time to do some debugging. So next week, remember the whole class time, you're going to work with your group. So be sure to be here so you guys can get all that good work done. You'll have that same sub that was here at the beginning of the semester. So she'll be back. So I hope you guys get a lot done.
We do have class though next Friday, right?
Yep, you do have class. You'll just be with your sub. So that'll give you guys a great opportunity to do your group work.